Hello mortals, I am the BookTube Goddess, the #1 drag queen booktuber on YouTube. I have a confession to make.
I totally failed
The Autumn Essentials Readathon. I may have drank a little too much boxed wine. Now when I got it, it was in the refrigerated section, so I let it come to room temperature. So I don't really drink that much boxed wine. In fact, I think this is my first boxed wine. Ooh. Or it could have been that I made the absolutely horrible, terrible, stupid decision to simultaneously read Twilight and Midnight Sun. In theory, I thought it would be neat to alternate chapters to get the story from the two main characters' point of view, Bella and Edward. And this almost
broke me.
It almost broke me. Seriously, I was having a hard time motivating myself to show any interest in these books. They dragged on and on and on for me. I left my Kindle in Reno, so I had to wait, and I went ahead and got a new Kindle. But when I got the Kindle, I kind of dreaded getting back into reading because I knew the books I had to read. So basically, I spent the entire month forcing myself to finish these two damned books, all for you. Hopefully you won't have to be forced to subscribe to my channel, and give this video a thumbs up if you want more videos like this. Now, going back to reading Twilight and Midnight Sun simultaneously, I think part of the issue was that much of the writing, or enough of the writing, was completely duplicated from one book to another. For example, the dialogue is exactly the same in both books, just framed from different points of view. If you even look at the chapter titles, many of them are the exact same chapter titles in both books. So I almost DNF'd it when I was about 50% through, but I really wanted to give it a chance, and I actually really wanted to do this video, so I forced myself just to keep going, and I did finish. So look, if you are a big stan of Twilight, I get it. Not every book is for everyone, and these books weren't for me. That's why there's 31 flavors of ice cream. Anyway, before we get into discussing the books, let's address one of the criticisms of Twilight, that it glorifies toxic relationships and therefore may harm young people, especially young girls who read it. And I just don't buy that. I think most young people know the difference between fiction and real life, and this reminds me of the arguments against violent video games based on studies of 3-year-old children mimicking the violence of adults. Well, a 13-year-old is a lot different than a 3-year-old. And certainly, I don't think there's any studies that show a detrimental effect to young people reading about toxic romances, even if it glorifies toxic romances. Now, maybe there are anecdotal stories, I don't know, but the bottom line for me is that I think young people are savvy readers and know the difference between fantasy and reality. I think even those who are Twilight fans would really freak out if their boyfriend breaks into their home and watches them while they sleep. At least I hope so. So while I think the Bella-Edward relationship is problematic as hell, I'm not really going to address it. I think there are tons of booktubers who have already pointed that out if you want to see their review videos, but I'm just going to accept it as a story for those who want to fantasize about a totally unrealistic relationship where the couple is bound together supernaturally. The fantasy in these novels is about a completely devoted lover who wants nothing to do but to serve your needs and protect you. But again, it's just a fantasy, something that lives just in your imagination. Now, I assume most people who are watching this video have already read Twilight or seen the movie. It's the same story. So I'm not going to be concerned about spoilers. If you've read Twilight and have not read Midnight Sun, don't worry, the story is exactly the same. You already know the story, so there's nothing really to spoil. Okay, where to begin? I was actually hopeful after reading the first 2 chapters in both books. It seemed like it could be a good story. Both were first-person accounts, Twilight from Bella's POV and Midnight Sun from Edward's POV. Actually, after reading the first chapter of Midnight Sun, I immediately thought, oh my gosh, Stephenie Meyer is a huge fan of Anne Rice, because it reminded me so much of the vampire Lestat in terms of the voice, the writing voice of Edward. The writing was a little old-fashioned, as one might expect from a 90-year-old man. So I like that, and you have to give credit to Stephenie Meyer as a writer. Now, by the way, I think Midnight Sun is the better written novel for what it's worth, and that kind of makes sense because Meyer has had more time to develop as a writer. Now, the problem with reading both books simultaneously, as I already mentioned, is that they are the exact same story, using the exact same dialogue, so it was a little painful rereading the same story. But to be fair, they aren't exactly alike. There are times when Bella and Edward are separated, so you do get to see what they are doing when the other is doing something else. For example, Bella goes to the beach and meets Jacob and learns about vampires, and during that time, Edward spends time with his family. Now, they don't actually separate very often. Most of the story they're together, but for Twilight stands, you will get a few scenes in Midnight Sun that aren't in Twilight. Okay, so let's talk briefly about Edward's mind-reading powers. You don't get this in Twilight, but in Midnight Sun, he seems way more powerful because not only can he hear people's thoughts, he can basically look through their eyes and hear through their ears. So even conversations in Twilight where Edward isn't around, he's actually eavesdropping on the conversation through someone else's eyes and hearing through someone else's ears. Now, talking about vampire powers, can I just say that I hate the character of Alice. Now, I'm not talking about her personality. Her personality is fine enough. It's a bit Pollyanna-ish, but it's fine. What I hate is her power to see the future. She's basically a walking Deus Ex Machina. She knows everything that's going to happen, can warn or steer Edward in the right direction. Basically, she seems to remove a lot of Edward's agency since she basically knows or can predict what is most likely to happen in the future. And yes, Edward sometimes doesn't listen to her, and once in a while she's wrong, or very wrong. But she's right much more often than she's not, and it really seems like she's sort of this puppet master directing everyone's actions, which I thought got a little tiring. Now, one thing I liked, and yes, there were things I liked about these stories, was Bella's immunity to Edward's telepathy, and you get this in Midnight Sun, that her ability may have been inherited because Edward has trouble hearing Bella's father, and also Bella's mother broadcasts her thought, which makes people subconsciously be manipulated by her. So Bella's mind power, such as it was, is a result of her parents' latent psychic power. So there's this genetic link. And I kind of want to see what happens if Bella's mother becomes a vampire, because her power could be kind of interesting. In talking about weird things about vampires, one thing that bothered me was whenever Bella was around Edward, Edward's mouth filled with venom because of how Bella smelled. So, how do they kiss? It was so confusing. He's always like slobbering venom. It's weird. Now, Myers addresses a lot of the complaints people had in Twilight and Midnight Sun. For example, Edward breaking into Bella's room and watching her sleep, which I think most of us can agree is pretty creepy. In Midnight Sun, Myers goes out of the way to explain it ad nauseum. I mean, this explanation is repeated over and over again as Edward feels guilty about what he's doing. But he apparently is somehow bonded to Bella, which compels him to be her protector, and he has really little control over this need to protect and watch over Bella. Now, this brings me to what I wish was explored more. I kind of wish the alienness of Edward was developed more. The fact that he is basically a different species, he's not human, and his behavior may be normal behavior for a vampire creature, even if it would be outrageous for a human male. But Myers kind of touches on this, but it's skirted around a lot, except when explaining Edward's creepy, stalkerish, codependent, toxic behavior. Now, the one thing I really did dislike was the love at first sight storyline, or love at first smell in the case of Edward. The first couple of chapters, Bella thought Edward was attractive, but didn't think he liked her, and she thought he acted hostile towards her for no reason. And Edward did actively dislike Bella because of her smell, setting off his vampire-y instincts. Strangely, these opening chapters were what I liked most about the book, but then their relationship went from 0 to 100, and suddenly they're declaring their undying love for each other. Now, I guess there's a little bit of courtship from Bella's point of view, but when reading Midnight Sun, Edward seems like he kind of was helpless once he bonded to Bella. And here's another thing. They were both described as extremely attractive, even if Bella thought she wasn't that attractive. All the guys were going after her. So why does this 90-year-old creature fall in love with a teenage girl? If he was a 90-year-old human, of course that would be weird. Don't you kind of want a vampire story with the vampire falling in love with the soul of a person, someone who's old and ugly? Now there's the story. Now it's kind of ironic that I hated this love at first sight story, because the only time I do like that type of storyline is usually found in vampire stories, when the human is the reincarnation of the vampire's previous life partner. I am a sucker for reincarnation love stories. And you see that a lot in mummy stories, but of course that wasn't what this story was. Okay, let me talk about what I really didn't like about this story and why it made me want to pull my wig off when I was reading it. I always look at the structure of the story, the plot of the story. Basically, it felt like there wasn't any. Now, I am admitting that I am not the person to dissect plots of romance stories. I think this novel in particularly really drove that point home for me. It could be that people are registering plot points or story development just in the relationship itself, but if so, they seem invisible to me. I really think that's my main issue with romance novels. Anyway, from my perspective, there's basically just a handful of plot points that stood out for me. Edward saving Bella from being hit by a car, Edward saving Bella from being gang raped, Edward taking Bella to the meadows to show off his sparkly tits, and the rogue vampires that show up during the baseball game. Now, there was really very little build-up to any of these events because they just suddenly happened, except with Edward taking Bella to the meadow, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the other events just happened. So there was a lot of dead air for me leading up to them. where nothing was happening except Bella wondering how Edward can really love her in Twilight, and Edward feeling guilty about being in love with Bella in Midnight Sun. Again, there could be romance plot points that resonate with some people, but for me, I didn't see them, and it just felt like nothing was happening for long stretches of the story. Now, the one plot point where Edward takes Bella to the meadows to show off his sparkly tips did have a buildup, especially in Midnight Sun, because Edward was basically testing himself whether or not he would kill Bella or not because of Alice's visions. If he didn't kill Bella, that means it was true love. If he did kill Bella, he'd hate himself for eternity. So, now, let's go to the climax where the rogue vampire decides to hunt Bella. So we finally got an action sequence where Edward actually seemed like he could possibly be in danger. Turns out he really wasn't, thanks to Alice, but there was a lot of tension-building scenes, which I was really hungry for. I would have preferred if this happened much, much earlier in the story, so there was tension throughout, but this took up maybe the last fourth of the novel. But, oh well. Now for Twilight stands, there are several chapters in Midnight Sun which are not in Twilight because Bella was passed out during a lot of this time period. So we get to see Edward arriving too late to the airport, and a really long car chase sequence, which frankly was ridiculous. Really, there's a whole chapter devoted to describing in excruciating detail stealing cars, driving from the airport to Bella, dealing with cops. And then after all the action happens, there's also a long chapter of cleaning up the aftermath of the big fight scene, so nothing could be traced back to them and there was no evidence of vampires. And the title of this chapter was called Chores. And it's about as exciting as it sounds. Now, if you don't know, I did not like these novels, and so I have to zap them. So I can't really recommend them, but if you are already a Twilight fan, I think you will enjoy Midnight Sun. Like I said, I think it is a better written novel, and there are several scenes which fill in some of the blanks that were in Twilight. Whatever the case, I do not suggest anyone read both of them simultaneously. Not a good idea. I'll have affiliate links below. Please give this video a thumbs up, and until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.